exchange gifts. This year she wants to learn about her ancestry, and I want her to have fun learning about her ancestry. So I went through an analysis of what would be the best kits for someone with her specific ancestry. She believes she is Alaska Native, Russian, and Mongolian. So to do this, well, to give you tonight's speech, I have broken it up into parts. I'm going to give you my approach. I'm going to walk through the approach, and then I'm going to stop, and we're going to have questions and answers, and at the end, I'll tell you what I ended up doing. So to begin with, I want to understand, how does the ancestry get determined from the DNA? Then I wanted to find out, how do these DNA tests identify a geographic area? And then I'm going to evaluate the various aspects of these tests to see if they're sound, if they're good. And the sources I used were good old-fashioned Googling, the white papers from each of the manufacturers, and then the good old-fashioned National Library of Medicine. So to begin with, there are two types of DNA. The autosomal DNA, which is what makes you you with your hair color, and you get from both your parents. And then there's the mitochondrial DNA that you get from your mother. So how do these tests work using the DNA? Basically what they do is they get a population of people of known DNA. Take an area like Sweden. Majority of those people will have a group of DNA that's quite similar, and then the test comes in and you compare that DNA with the people who live in Sweden. And the percentage of DNA that matches up with theirs is the percentage of what might be your ancestry. But keep in mind that the borders change. Remember, about 100 years ago, there was a place called Austria-Hungary, which is now broken down into Austria-Hungary, Czechoslovakia, a little bit of Poland, a little Ukraine. The borders change, even right now. Crimea, is it Russian, is it Ukrainian? Are you Russian, are you Ukrainian? Then there's also people migrating from here and there. Think of the English folks that migrated to Australia. So all these impact your definition of the location and of your ancestry. Google came up with 6 different tests. You've heard of some of them, I'm sure, because of the advertising. What jumped out to me were 3 things. I compared the prices, and I found that, especially during sale season, they're pretty well comparable. The next thing that jumped out at me was that one of them had both the mitochondrial and the autosomal tests. So you got 2 for the price of 1, so I immediately put a check mark on that one, thinking, I want to learn more about that test. The other one was based on the fact that 2 out of these 6 use saliva instead of a cheek scraping. So I wanted to know, what's the big deal? Would saliva actually be a better sample and give you better results? So I looked for articles in the National Library of Medicine, and I found one that compared the quantity of DNA. Obviously, you have more volume, so you can have more DNA to work with. If you have more DNA to work with, I was thinking, hey, you can do more tests. You can repeat tests that you're not sure about. But if you get a scraping, you might have a little more of a problem with being able to redo things. So selecting those 2, I wanted to find evidence that the populations that she might be associated with are actually in the reference panel, the group of people that we would compare her DNA with. So again, I went to the white papers of both Ancestry and 23andMe, and I scanned through the articles, through the pages, until I found something close to what might be her ancestry. What disappointed me was all of the ancestry information for the ancestry autosomal, for this one, they're all general. Her 3 areas, the Russian, starting with the Russian, working on the way back, is not specific enough. It's embedded in Eastern European. Mongolian was available, so she has one of the 3. And her American Native could be embedded somewhere within there, but American Native is defined as North, Central, and Southern American, not what we usually call Native American. So then I want to look at the accuracy of these tests. How likely are they to identify her ancestry correctly? And I found that both 23andMe and Ancestry were very close in their quality of being able to identify a sample as being in one of those categories. So then I put everything together in one great big table to stare at. And what popped out to me is they're pretty similar, except 23andMe gives you both autosomal mitochondria and gives you a specific population, one of the three that she might actually have heritage with. At this point in time, take a look at the screen, and I am open for questions on the analysis and trying to determine which one of these would be the best for my friend who is Native, Alaska Native, Russian, and Mongolian. Which one would you have more fun with learning about her heritage? Any questions? Deborah?
What additional information does mitochondrial DNA get you?
Well, thank you for that question. Mitochondrial DNA, as I said, was passed on from mother to children. From mother to children. Daughters then will pass on their mother's mitochondrial, and basically it is a maternal lineage of DNA. And in theory, my friend, who is a woman, would be able to trace her female heritage all the way back to her Eve. Now, John, you had a question.
Well, I looked at both of these studies too. There was another factor beyond that where 23andMe gave more information than just ancestry.
On wellness.
On health patterns.
She has no interest in the health patterns. We already talked about that. I asked her, do you want to know health? Hands down, 23andMe. But she's not interested in that. So then I zeroed in on which test was less Eurocentric and more global.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Well, can you talk more about the accuracy of the two tests?
Thank you for that question. Good question. So basically, when these companies create their tests, they then set up a sample environment, and they test it against, the sample is known mix, like I know the sample here is Swedish, and I'm going to run it against the Swedish database. I want 100% of the times to say, yes, these guys are Swedish. And I want 100% of the time that everybody in here is identified. So the lower the percentages, the more likely that either, not all of them, all of the ancestry will be linked to a historical area, geographic area, or somebody will get missed that has a heritage that really doesn't, that really does. So in my friend's case, the Mongolian accuracy here is 69%. So if she, knowing that her heritage, she thinks she's pretty sure this is her, but if she comes back not Mongolian, there is roughly a 30% chance that it missed her and she really is of Mongolian heritage. Any other questions? Oh.
The categories, are they just from modern groups? What I'm talking about, something like telling if someone is either way back Germanic or Celtic, since they don't have existing groups, can they really tell anything like that?
There are pools of data that are public that have been already spliced and identified as you're Irish, you're English, and they use that. Some portion of that is used with both of these. And then they augment it with the data that comes in from their own tests. Their grouping is their analysis of how tightly they can identify a particular grouping. It just so happened that they both defined the Eastern European pretty much the same to include those countries. It's pretty standard right now. Any other questions? Yes?
Does it only test for the areas you select, or will it tell you what your DNA is?
It runs it against everything that they have defined. So, yeah, you may get surprised. She may find out she's Swedish. So,
I-
on to the next page, real quickly, because I am out of time. So what do you all think? Which one should she get? Raise your hand if you think it's Ancestry. 1. And 23andMe? Oh, the majority of you are 23andMe. That was my inclination, except I want my friend to have a really good time, so I'm getting a vote.